Okay, great. Let's get started. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, both in person at Oxford and online here on Zoom. I have a bit of a shoddy internet connection, so I apologize if it goes awry. We've got a truly international crowd today. So Chris Timmerman is joining the audience in person at Oxford. Daniel McQueen is calling in from Colorado, and Andrew Gallimore is calling in from Okinawa, Japan, where it is currently 4:30 a.m.
Tokyo.
Sorry, from Tokyo, where it's 4:30 in the morning. So Andrew, you're a real trooper. Thank you so much for joining us. So this is Mapping Out DMT Hyperspace. We are very lucky to be joined today by three incredible speakers. Andrew Gallimore, Chris Timmerman, and Daniel McQueen will be speaking in that order. Let me just introduce the three speakers very briefly. Dr. Andrew Gallimore is a computational neurobiologist, pharmacologist, chemist, and writer who's been interested in the neural basis of psychedelic drug action for many years and is an author of a number of articles and research papers on the powerful psychedelic drug DMT and its effects on the brain and consciousness. He recently collaborated with DMT pioneer Dr. Rick Strassman, author of DMT, the Spirit Molecule, to develop a pharmacokinetic model of DMT as the basis of a target-controlled intravenous infusion protocol for extended journeys in DMT space, also known as DMTx. His current interests focus on DMT as a tool for gaining access to extra-dimensional realities and how this can be understood in terms of the neuroscience of information. He currently lives and works in Japan. Next, Chris Timmerman obtained a BSc in psychology in Santiago, Chile, and an MSc in cognitive neuroscience at the University of Bologna in Italy. He is based at Imperial College London at the Center for Psychedelic Research, where he led neuroimaging research on the effects of the potent psychedelic DMT in the human brain and consciousness. His work focuses on the neuroscience, psychology, beliefs, and ethics of the psychedelic experience. And finally, last but not least, Daniel McQueen is a psychedelic specialist, psychedelic therapy educator, activist, and author of the book Psychedelic Cannabis. In 2012, he co-founded the Center of Medicinal Mindfulness, which is the first legal plant-based psychedelic therapy center in the United States. Daniel specializes in using cannabis-assisted psychedelic therapy and ketamine-assisted psychedelic therapy as tools for transformation and healing. His work with psychedelic cannabis has created a widespread movement of practitioners across the US and Canada. In 2016, to test his own activist edges, Daniel initiated the DMTx research and exploration program to implement a new extended state DMT administration protocol that was designed by Dr. Andrew Gallimore and Dr. Rick Strassman. Most recently, with the team of Naropa Aligned Psychedelic Advocates, Daniel helped found the nonprofit Medicinal Mindfulness Center for Psychedelics, Spirituality, and Sustainability to focus on the use of psychedelics in ethical professional settings for healing and to help transform the global climate crisis. So truly an all-star team. Thank you, the three of us, for joining. So the event is going to consist of three 15-minute presentations from Andrew, Chris, and then Daniel, and then we'll launch into a moderated Q&A, and finally some questions from the audience, and we'll aim to be done by 9 p.m. UK time. So Andrew, without further ado, I'll let you take it away. Yep.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming. Okay, so I will talk briefly about, I guess, the origins a little bit of DMTx and why I'm particularly interested in DMT and what I see as the potential use cases for DMT, which might differ from Chris's, but we will see. So first of all, is it not working? Oh, there we go. Obligatory plugs. Please do go to my website if you want to see everything that I write about and talk about and all that kind of stuff. buildingalienworlds.com. Also, please do buy my new book, Reality Switch Technologies, recommended by Hamilton Morris. Hey, who else? And my first book as well, Alien Information Theory, which is also excellent, not recommended by Hamilton Morris. So DMT, for me, is interesting, more than interesting. It is astonishingly, remarkably fascinating for me, and has been for at least a couple of decades, and is what kind of prompted me to think about or to inspire DMTx originally back in sort of 2015. Whilst we've learned largely, owing to the work of the Imperial College team and others, we know a lot more about DMT now and how it works in the brain. There's still quite a lot, I would say, about DMT's phenomenology that we still do not understand and that we still struggle to explain, and I would dare say quite a lot that remains somewhat confounding. Even as a neuroscientist, I find the complexity and the content and the structure of the DMT space to be utterly confounding, and I don't think it is straightforward to explain it. So extended sojourns within the DMT space certainly can have a lot of value there. And of course, you're all familiar, I think, with the phenomenology of the DMT space, this inordinate complexity, this hyper-technological space that appears to contain more spatial dimensions than our 3+1 dimensional universe. The presence of these extremely powerful and seemingly hyper-intelligent beings, the lucidity, the efficiency, and the clarity of the space is quite remarkable. And of course, that old question that everyone asks when you talk about DMT, is it real? Sort of the ontological question, I think, is, for me at least, an extremely interesting one. Perhaps the central question we all want to know the answer to. Is it real? Whatever real might mean, and perhaps we can talk about that. So I think we have three basic broad interpretations of the DMT space. We can call it some kind of hallucination. That would be your orthodox default position. It is a pure wild fabrication of the human brain. Perhaps it is some kind of unconscious structures bubbling up from the collective psyche, in a sort of Jungian sense. That has some merits as well, or shifting to the much more unorthodox, slightly more far out explanations, which I tend to reach into sometimes to some criticism, but whatever. The idea that we might in fact be dealing with some kind of intelligence, some kind of non-human, discarnate, alien, dare we say, intelligence from some other external reality. These are unanswered questions. So the problem with DMT, of course, is that it is a very brief trip. You're hurtled into this extremely bizarre realm, disoriented, shocked, horrified, appalled. You have a chance to look around wide-eyed for 3 minutes, 4 minutes, maybe max at the peak. And then you are dragged back into the consensus world again. So it is not the standard smoking or bolus administration of DMT is not amenable to more detailed analysis and exploration and, dare we say, mapping, which is what we're going to talk about today. So the idea that we might be able to extend the experience by using this technology illustrated here from anesthesiology came to me back in 2015. The idea of delivering DMT with this slow, sustained drip is certainly not my idea originally. Other people have used similar technologies, but I think what myself and Rick Strassman were able to bring to the table was the idea of using a pharmacokinetic model, using the technology from anesthesiology, what's called target controlled intravenous infusion, or TCI, to actually maintain a stable brain concentration. So you're not merely delivering an infusion, but you're actually delivering a programmed infusion informed by a pharmacokinetic model, such that you can maintain a stable brain DMT concentration over time. So you can induce somebody into the DMT state and hold them there at a stable level, rather than having the levels fluctuate or based upon chance or guesswork. So the target controlled intravenous infusion technology relies upon this pharmacokinetic model, and that takes account of the distribution and metabolism and excretion, elimination of the drug over time, so as to maintain this stable brain concentration. And I know that Chris Timmerman and collaborators have been able to much improve upon this proof of principle model that myself and Rick Strassman developed. So what originally prompted me to believe that DMT was amenable to this technology was its unique pharmacological peculiarities that make it almost as if it was designed to be used in this way, and that it has this very rapid but brief clinical or subjective effects, and as Rick Strassman was able to demonstrate in the 90s, that it doesn't have a behavioral tolerance. So you can inject somebody with DMT and they will have a certain intensity of effect, which he was able to measure, and then inject them 30 minutes later and they would have exactly the same intensity of effect. So this is a really important discovery by Rick Strassman, which meant to me, as I was reading his papers, that it would make DMT amenable to this kind of technology. So I wrote to Rick back in sometime in 2015 and asked for his blood data, hoped that he would still have this blood data, which fortunately he did, and that allowed me to construct this preliminary proof of principle model, which we then published in 2016, and which I think it's fair to say piqued a lot of people's interest in this, and it's kind of remarkable to me and very nice to see that in the 7 years since this paper has been published now, almost, it's garnered a lot of attention and inspired a lot of people. And we're actually now, it's kind of amazing, we have 2 people here also talking who are actually implementing this technology, some for more academic, on the sort of more academic side, the established, proper university, so to speak, at Imperial, and then perhaps closer to my original vision, the kind of the non-academic, the more exploratory side. So we have a nice balance there, which is cool. And no doubt there will be other groups who appear in the coming years, also developing their own version of DMTx. So the idea is that this initial roller coaster entry phase, which is normally the extent of the DMT experience after the bolus injection, you can push past that and enter what I would call an orientation phase, where the individual is able to kind of orient themselves within the DMT space. And then it was my hope, my prediction, and mainly my hope, that the state would actually stabilize over time, and that the subject, the tripper, the journeyer, would actually be able to fully orient themselves and remain stable within the state, which would then open up the space for more detailed exploration, to mapping, and perhaps even to experiments and that kind of thing. And I think hopefully that's something that's been borne out with the Imperial team's experiments. Maybe Chris will talk about that. So what do we do with DMTx? Finally, obviously there are the more kind of prosaic applications of DMTx, so the clinical applications which certainly aren't insignificant and could be quite important, I think, because you can control the level of the experience, bring people in, bring them out, kind of allow kind of multiple integration periods within the same trip, pushing them a little bit further, dealing with some kind of unconscious material, that kind of thing, then bring them out to actually discuss that. So I think it has many advantages perhaps over just giving someone psilocybin or LSD or whatever, and then kind of riding out over several hours the trip. So, but also, of course, for me personally, I'm more interested in the phenomenology of the state. And I think there are two broad questions which we might get to talk about today. Obviously, there's the mapping one, in quotation marks here. I think there are many ways we can interpret the word mapping, and that's obviously something we're going to talk about today. So mapping of the space and also the occupants, the entity experiences. These are some of the most interesting aspects. Who you meet in the DMT space, I think many people are particularly interested in. Then we have questions of ontological testing. So is it real? And I think there are two broad ways that you might look at that. And one is to actually test in some way the DMT space via the brain, and also testing the entities themselves. So testing the space. What I mean here is, at Breaking Convention of 3 years ago, I spoke about this idea of whether the DMT world could be thought of as a sensed world or as a dreamt world. So a sensed world is one that is constrained and constrained by sensory information. Sensed worlds are not magical worlds. They have certain properties. So the normal waking world has certain properties. It has stability, it has consistency, it has predictability. And Jeff Hawkins, theoretical neuroscientist, spelled that wrong, sorry, says predictability is the very definition of reality. So we might be able to actually judge the reality, the ontology of the DMT space, not by kind of having to kind of reach out into the space and actually test the beings or whatever, but actually look at how the brain is constructing it. And that might tell us whether it's a world that's being actively modulated, actively constrained by some kind of sensory information from outside the brain versus a purely dreamt world or a purely hallucinated world. So I think there's a lot of the DMT space might be amenable to testing in that way without having to actually reach out into the space. And then, of course, for many years, people have thought about how we might test the entities to determine whether or not they are real, so to speak. And we can think of tasks or that we might give them. People have thought about giving them mathematical problems, finding the unique prime factors of very large numbers, something that a human brain couldn't do during the trip or any time really, that these beings, if they truly are, hyper intelligences, they might be able to achieve. Obviously there are issues with this kind of tests, but also you might ask the entities to provide information that cannot be known by the subject, this kind of thing. Okay, so I think, how long am I speaking? I think that's enough from me. So I will finish there, and so we have a lot more to discuss then. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrew. We'll now switch over to Chris, who is live in Oxford. And now we will go to Daniel McQueen for the third and final presentation.
Hey everybody, how's my volume?
I think you're good.
All right, great. Well, thanks for having me, and Chris, congratulations on the on being able to do the expeditions. That's really wonderful. It's inspiring to be part of this program, and being inspired by you both. Andrew, it's great seeing you here as well. I have a short presentation I'd like to share with you all. So just to name that, I'm coming from a completely different orientation as a psychedelic guide and facilitator. I'm here in Boulder, Colorado, and I learned about extended state DMT through Rick Strassman, who sent me the paper that he and Andrew wrote in 2016. And then I gave a presentation on the subject, just there, the topic as something that really inspired me when we did a presentation called Psychedelic Shine here in Boulder, where we had Terence McKenna come to speak as well. So, and then after that, people started to ask me, well, what would it take to do this? We should try to do this. So I started to explore what it would actually take. So I'm coming from a foundation of stepping out of the research space and into a realm of possibly designing retreat experiences and intensive experiences for different populations and communities. So let me share my screen here, and we'll just, hold on just a second. We'll just hop right into it. Can you all see that okay? There we go. This looks normal. Okay. So if you're interested in learning more about my program, we're one of the first psychedelic therapy centers in the United States working in a legal setting. We work with cannabis as a psychedelic and ketamine, and Proposition 122 just passed here in Colorado. And so now psilocybin and DMT are legal for personal use, and we'll be stepping into regulated model in the next few years. So we're going to start working with psilocybin and DMT in a clinical community setting. And so I'd like to invite you to explore cannabis as a psychedelic, because there's a lot of similarities between a strong cannabis experience and an extended state DMT trip, very similar to ayahuasca and psilocybin. One of our primary partners that I'd like to recommend checking out is Neuroscientists. And Andrew, I believe you're on the board of advisors now with Neuroscientists and Egan Ehrenberg's group. So this is a community to help us with the nonprofit side of the work. And then our program is called Dream Mind Technology Expeditions. We actually created a company to handle all of the back-end logistics of this work. So, and Andrew came up with the concept of the name DMTx. We worked together to play with the name, what we call it, extended state DMT. And I know there's other names for it as well. So one of the primary differences of our program and what Chris is doing is that we work within a multi-paradigm approach where we acknowledge and foundation and scientific inquiry, but we also honor the spiritual and the existential dimensions, the transpersonal dimensions of this work. We work with a lot of indigenous practitioners and other spiritual practitioners. And then most of our team comes from a grounded clinical background. So psychological safety and exploration is really important to us. And then honoring the community aspects of DMT and other psychedelic medicines, the creativity and aesthetics. So we do a lot of art around this work, and we want to bring in more music as a facilitator's tool to this. And I put on here, this mirrors the primary missions of our particular program, in that we want to work, not only do we want to just explore this space, I think Chris is taking the lead on the logistics and the safety and all of that piece. And once that's dialed in, we want to put scientists through this experiment and see what that does to their psyche and their brain. And maybe it can help them come up with big solutions to world problems. Another idea we want to do is bring in spiritual and religious practitioners and teachers. So creating like community events around this where people can come together, have a shared vision or intention, have an experience, a shared experience with extended state DMT, and then come back and speak to it, and maybe something phenomenal will come out of that. So here's our current team, and I'm going to share a little bit about what we've done over the last few years, but myself and Carla, Dr. Clemens is our co-facilitators. We do have a medical team comprising of anesthesiologists and medical doctors and nurses. We have a clinical team with psychologists and a lot of art therapists, licensed professional counselors. this is to ensure that people are landing well and have the support they need afterwards. And then we have a technical team. We're also interested in the EEG work, thinking that maybe we might be able to stabilize it in different ways, than what Chris is saying. And we're also bringing an artist, a sketch artist, so that they can have the experiences described to them and actually jot it down and try to create some images around this. And right now we have a cohort of 8 DMTx psychonauts that we've been training with over the last few years. One of the things Rick said is like comparing the typical modern DMT experience and what he like called visionary states, you know, using ancient Judaism as a model, was that there was a lot more stability and meaning in the people who had mindfulness practices. And so we're actively engaging in practicing different mindfulness techniques to help bring in stability to these extended state experiences. And then Andrew just alluded to this, so I just went ahead and added this slide, that we think that there might be different applications for different levels of DMT stabilization, from like on the lower end, from like clinical disorders and physiological disorders that could, you know, maybe DMT infusions could help. Then there's like these a little bit higher level of creative psycholytic levels of therapeutic or art enhancing. Then there's like the ayahuasca levels, and then a dual awareness space where you're kind of, it sounds like what Chris was doing is they're able to communicate through the journey and give feedback in the present moment. And then what we would call like the breakthrough state, where the person was probably non-responsive, but going into a full DMT experience for an extended period of time. How long someone can do this, you know, like is going to be an interesting question. I know from experience that people's bladders start talking to them about an hour and a half, you know, so we're wondering, you know, about like just the physical limitations of being in these states. And then we think that there's probably an upper limit of just usability, that there might not be like, you know, like just to not take too much, otherwise it would just become too fragmented and disconnected and confusing. And this is what I believe, you know, this is an ancient alchemical image, which I think I've seen Andrew use before in the past, but like there's this normal reality that we're all a part of that's 3-dimensional plus time, and then there does appear to be this ability with the use of DMT as a technology to start like our brains attempting to perceive higher dimensional states of reality that may be populated by something that's objectively unique and different than us, not interconnected with us, but maybe something more than us. So that's the big question that we're all curious about. And then, you know, again, we love art, and so we created these astronaut psychonaut badges, you know, that we give to our team members and things, you know, just to bring in community and play and creativity into these programs. And Andrew shared an older version of this image, but, you know, like eventually like creating some sort of DMT manual, you know, space technology and DMT technology is really interrelated. So I keep playing with this idea of like, when SpaceX goes to Mars, you know, what are they going to do for taking a break from that little pod? You know, maybe extended state DMT can go to Mars with the astronauts at some point in our future, maybe 50 or 100 years, who knows? And then let's see. So what have I been doing these last few years while you all have been working on your projects? We've done a series of psychonaut training retreats and expeditions using legal medicines here in Colorado. And so the first one we did, we had a community, you know, we have these communities are about, you know, 20-person groups. We worked with cannabis and breath work, and then we actually participated in a peyote ceremony as a community. And the intention was to, you know, prepare ourselves psychically, so to speak, spiritually, mentally, physically for extended state DMT experiences. Then we did another one the next year and added ketamine experiences. And I've been working with a lot of ketamine a bit with clients and working with it myself as well. And I'm starting to see the connections with ketamine and DMT and how to navigate these really deep spaces that are very altered. And In DMTx3, we went online and worked with cannabis and breathwork again, because we were supposed to go to Costa Rica, and this was we were planning this right as COVID was happening. And Costa Rica was supposed to be our first DMT related experiences with ayahuasca analogs and smoked DMT, changa. And that got canceled, so we went online instead. And then DMTx4 is going to happen this year in Colorado. We were set to go to Jamaica, so we had set it up. We were getting the medicine imported. I don't want to go into the details of all of that, but you know, we have a legal team, and we were having the medicine imported for DMT experiences in Jamaica because it was legal there. That got postponed because our offices got flooded. We had this weird climate change related event here in Colorado. It was like a really significant storm, and it flooded our offices, and it derailed our program for about a month. And at that same time, I realized that Proposition 122 was going to be voted on. So we paused the trip, realizing that maybe we could just bring the DMTx program to Colorado. And so Proposition 122 passed, and we're going to do our first real, full DMT retreat using smoked DMT this summer here in Colorado. First legal DMT retreat in the United States, possibly. And then we're starting to we're going to start a series of expedition retreats using smoked DMT while we figure out the regulated model and bringing in synthetic DMT for the extended state DMT experiences. And that's going to, that'll be happen, the next few years is kind of the intention there. So here, what we were thinking, this was our Costa Rica expedition, well, that didn't happen, but we were going to work out of these little pod rooms that were really nice, different set up music and things, and have a really nice contained space. And that this is what it would, this would be the setup for something like this. So what Chris has done, is something that we hope to do, and to have co-guides, a medical doctor and a nurse, a lot of equipment in the room, but a lot of support as well, where they, and also, like initially doing it with intentionality, meditation, and depending on the client or the psychonaut, possibly prayer as well, with a beautiful meditation altar in the middle, in front of the psychonaut, so they could see something pretty that was nice to them before they go into the expedition. And then the long-term goal, to make it more affordable, and to explore with group expeditions, is to create a larger room with 4 psychonauts going at about the same time, with kind of a station in the middle for the medical staff, but away from the visual view of the psychonauts, each one having sitter and guides, and then having like a different technology in the room for monitoring safety, and possibly even documenting, with video and film. And then after people would come out of the journey experiences, they would go directly to assessment experts and integration therapists, and maybe even the sketch artist, to share their experiences as well. So that's about where we're at. Like, we're right on, in the next few months, we'll be doing our first DMT journey expeditions, and then hopefully that will, build from there to be able to offer extended state DMT when, again, the laws and the regulations kind of catch up to us here in Colorado. So, so that's what I have to share for you all.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Absolutely fantastic talk. So we are now it's now 8:45. So we only got about 15 minutes left in this event. So I'll just ask one question real quick, and then move on to questions from the audience, as I'm sure there are many. So the title of this event is Mapping Out DMT Hyperspace, and I want to get your thoughts on to what extent we can actually create a real map of the DMT hyperspace and what that map actually looks like. You know, like in a physical map, we have coordinates, right? Latitude and longitude. What would the coordinates of the DMT map look like?
Okay, should I begin?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting question. I think the idea of mapping has been raised by a number of people. I think there's a little bit of hyperbole surrounding the idea of mapping. I think a lot of people thought that the idea of mapping the DMT space is kind of ridiculous because it is so complex, it is so strange, it is so variable. So I don't think we're anywhere close to a kind of an ordnance survey. You won't know what that is, Kenneth. Well, maybe you will. I don't have that in the States, but anyway, so, you know, some kind of ordnance survey map of the DMT space, I think, is out of the question. But that doesn't mean we can't have some kind of mapping. So one can think about level mapping, for example. So do different levels of intensity of experience reliably take you to different types of spaces? Is there a progression? I mean, people talk already about, you know, moving through the waiting room and the dome, and there's already been developed in a very informal sense a certain kind of mapping of the space. You know, what is the normal procession through the space? So I think we have that. That's something that we can anchor and work with. And formalize more and get a better description of the kind of experience one should expect, even if there is going to be some stochasticity there and variability between individuals. But also, mapping might also mean the kind of the topological or geometric structure of the space. I know there are a number of people thinking about that. You know, can we map how the geometry and the topology of the space changes over time? Can we formalize that? Can we get a formal description of the different types of the kind of mathematical spatial structure of the space over time? So I think there's a lot we can do with mapping, and then of course mapping the entities as well, you know, the flora and fauna of the DMT space. So I think it needs to be worked out what we mean by mapping, but I don't think we're completely lost when it comes to the idea of mapping. I think there are many things that we can, many approaches. I think we're spoiled for choice, really, the number of approaches we can take when it comes to formally describing in a much better way than we have now, beyond kind of just kind of trip reports, kind of phenomenological verbal trip reports. Daniel spoke about getting actual pictures being drawn of the space, you know, and so I think there are many opportunities there.
Before we move on to either Chris or Daniel, I just want to say to the people online, please post your questions in the chat and I'll read them out later on. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the idea of mapping is interesting and important because after doing many of these interviews, I've realized that a big part of the experience is determined by cultural factors, as you would expect, and much more than people intuitively or naively think when it comes to DMT. I think that there's a bit of a trick with the DMT space, that it makes you feel that what you're seeing is very fundamental and authentic. And I think people tend to forget quite a bit that our ordinary perception is filled with traps and assumptions about what is real out there. So I think that what the first step to take to try to achieve any form of mapping is to take a rigorous approach to understand these experiences. And we have traditions that can help us in that regard. So one tradition is, for example, the tradition of phenomenology and the phenomenologists, you know, the philosophical tradition of the careful and disciplined examination of experience. And we have other traditions that are linked to contemplative practices. I think that this is actually one of the most fruitful possible approaches that I think from phenomenology that we can take here is how do we train individuals to examine their own experiences with a critical perspective. So I think what can be derived from that, and what is interesting actually for us to understand, how is this a method for exploration of, what it means to be alive, is not try to understand so much the contents of the experience, but the structures of the experience, the forms. What are the fundamental properties of how these things come about? So you're much more interested in the process rather than in the content. And the way to do that, I think, is fundamentally a relational process. So you need, to have another person, an experienced facilitator who have undergone, all those tricky aspects of examining their own experiences with a critical eye that can help you scaffold your own process of examining your own experience. So I think that's kind of like the approach that I think is more fruitful, and that hopefully will get us advanced in a way to try to understand these experiences a bit better, rather than, over fetishizing certain features of it that seems to be, almost memes now in today's culture. So I think, I think that would be my general approach when it comes to the idea of mapping the experience.
Thanks so much, Chris. Daniel, did you have anything you wanted to add on to that?
Yeah, I'll just point a couple of things that are a little different. I agree with everything that Chris and Andrew were saying. We've noticed that there's like levels, maybe what Andrew was saying. What I would put them under would be like personal biographical material, and then what we would have is like the collective unconscious or dreamlike material, which archetypal and cultural. Then there appears to be like a level beyond that, which might be considered transpersonal, or you could use there's different religious models that might come into play here, and then possibly like what would you call them, like the multiverse or multiple realities, or just this very bizarre alien landscape that's not human at all. Another way I would consider mapping it is temporal, like past, present, and future. Like, is the content about the past? Is it about like what's happening in the world today? Or is it like future oriented, or like vision or prophecy, or like high technology, science fiction type oriented would be another way I would look at it. And then also like how fast time goes. Is it like personal, like scales that are human, or is it scales that are like geological and like universal, like witnessing the Big Bang and the creation of galaxies and things like that. And then Chris, I think you're pointing to something really important, is like mapping like healthy responses, like clinically healthy responses to these experiences versus what we would call unhealthy or diluted responses to this medicine. Because we get a lot of emails from people who use a lot of DMT, and some of which I would say are expressing like unhealthy expeditions and overuse, and like learning how to distinguish from like a real transpersonal phenomenon and something that is diluted or fantasy. And these are things that work in the realm of like psychology and clinical applications of assessment, so those would be areas that I would explore.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Daniel. I'll ask just one more question because I can't resist. I'm curious whether you guys think that it's possible to form relationships with the entities in the DMT space. In other words, the more time that you spend in DMT hyperspace, can you actually get to know the entities deeper? And in the process, can you actually gain greater self-knowledge to the extent that those entities are just reflections of your own consciousness?
Well, apparently so. I've been in contact with quite a few people over the years who contact me, and who people who are very experienced with DMT. Particularly now, people are using these vape pens, which is kind of a very crude DMTx, in that you can actually control the level of experience. Without having glass pipes and naked flames, you can actually maintain yourself kind of within the space over time. And I've had reports from people that over many months of using DMT regularly, they are able to regularly make contact and meet and indeed develop a relationship with certain entities. And, you know, I believe them. I have no reason to distrust that. So it certainly seems possible. It doesn't seem, if you go in there with some kind of intent to meet a certain entity, and if you're familiar with that entity, then it does seem possible that you can encounter that particular entity over time, which is remarkable, really, because, as you say, you know, it could be, if you can establish some kind of two-way communication, you might be able to garner information about perhaps yourself, but also perhaps their world. I mean, it's kind of, it's almost unfathomable that you could develop this relationship with this entity, who you can then extract information, or that's maybe the wrong word. It sounds a bit colonialist, but that you could actually develop some kind of two-way communicative relationships, such that you can ask them questions about the origin of their space. You know, we can't assume that it is just a reflection of the self. These are the sort of questions we can deal with if we can do that. So I think that's a really important, actually, aspect of this. It's not just about mapping the space and kind of looking around but actually working more like an anthropologist than just an explorer. In that you are actually getting to know the beings within the space and learning about their culture, so to speak, their hyperdimensional culture, and where they came from and what they are and what they do and what it means. You know, that to me is a really important approach. It seems a much more natural approach for humans who are very communicative, you know, social beings. We like to talk to other beings to get information. So I think that's a really important approach that we can take with DMT, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to complement that, I think that if one looks into actually the anthropological literature of Amazonian cultures, whether it's mestizo or indigenous ones, you'll find that, you know, ayahuasca users, especially shamans, do develop stable relationships with, you know, the spirits that they encounter and the plants that they are attached to, and how there's a clear relationship that is cultivated in that for the skillful use of certain medicines attached to those plants. So I think, I mean, to your question, Kenneth, I think there is, whether or not it's possible, I think the anthropological literature suggests that it happens. What I think is crucially different in that context from the psychonatic Western context is that the cosmology is kind of supports that sort of cultivation of those relationships in these Amazonian cultures. We've given extended forms of DMT to individuals on repeated occasions, up to 4 occasions. And we don't see the stability of these entities or these beings. And again, I'm not making any assumption here about the ontology of these beings. I'm just saying their experiences. So we don't see a stability of them, you know, recurring the same entity or the same feature. And it could be that with the right cultural priming, for example, a strong cosmovision about, you know, entity X, Y, or Z, then there could be some form of stabilization of that entity when the experiences are happening, and that these relationships can be cultivated, and that these relationships can be meaningful for the individual. So I think it's a very context-dependent thing whether or not these things are possible. Yeah.
Daniel, did you have anything you wanted to add on to that?
Yeah, I've heard a story similar to what Chris is saying, even a ayahuasca practitioner of having even a second life and a second family, you know, and a lot of people report back and have feeling connected to their ancestors, you know, so these, you know, some of these entities might not be completely random, but somehow connected to us if you believe in that particular worldview. And I have had multiple experiences with the same entities that have come to talk to me, and they speak in color and flashing lights and point the way. You know, somebody mentioned in the thing that they're guides. They show us how to step into these inner spaces, and I would love to have like a longer conversation than just a few minutes with that. And sometimes the symbols that they share, some of the visual symbols, are clues to personal processes, and that I've worked with and don't show up for years and years later. I don't understand why that particular symbol showed up for years. I think of the DMTx idea as like a foreign student exchange program. You're able to immerse yourself in another culture, and hopefully it'd be stabilized long enough that you just don't, like, the channel just doesn't change over and over again, and that you're able to have a ongoing relationship. I think that's actually really possible in these spaces.
Amazing. Thanks so much. So we'll take just 2 questions from online and then 2 questions from the in-person audience. We are already a bit over time. So Chris, if you do need to head out, let me know. But hopefully we can take about like maybe 15 minutes of questions from the audience. So this first one is from Adam. He says, the DMT experience feels like it comes from outside itself. What is the reason for this?
So there could be many reasons why it feels outside the self. And I think if you want to be very cynical about it, you can give a very reductionistic explanation. So we see that there's a strong dysregulation of normal brain activity in the frontal cortex. And we know that certain metacognitive capacities, so the ability to be aware of our own thoughts or what is real and not real, can be compromised, if you will, under a certain extent. So I think from a reductionistic approach, I'm not saying I have that approach, I'm just saying that, you know, it's a possibility. It could be that it feels real because our ability to determine what is real and not real is fairly compromised. And there's not just this, you know, biological explanation, there's also the phenomenological explanation. A lot of people have strong insights in these experiences which are not necessarily real, and that upon further examination, in fact, do seem that, you know, they don't make much sense. So it could be that. The alternative explanation, you know, I'll leave it for maybe others to contribute to it.
Okay, so I guess you mean me. Yeah, so okay, so I think, sure, this reality testing is very difficult and complicated, and certainly, I mean, even in the dream state, this frontal deactivation is present, so you don't normally recognize that the dream state is a dream unless you are a lucid dreamer, where you can kind of reactivate. And you see this kind of thing also in schizophrenia, where people hear voices, and there seems to be an issue with the attribution of that voice that you would normally attribute to yourself because of this disconnectivity between the frontal and other parts of the brain. There is obviously the extremely alien nature of the experience, the intensity, the clarity, all of these things, the fact that it does seem to bear no relationship whatsoever to normal waking reality, all of it makes it seem extremely alien, which can contribute to that. Maybe whether that means it truly is alien is a different matter. One thing I would say is that what you see with dreamers is when dreamers wake up, they accept fully that it was just a dream. And likewise, when schizophrenics are treated, and when they recover from their delusionary thought process, they again accept that the voice in their head was just them, you know, it wasn't real. What's striking, I think, about DMT is that even after the trip is over and you come down from the experience, people are still utterly 100% convinced, even though they know they took a drug, they took a powerful psychedelic drug, they still remain completely convinced that this was not just so they have all of their reality testing faculties reconstructed, and yet they will still tell you there's no way that this was just a hallucination or just a product of their own mind. What do you make of that? I don't know, but I think it's quite interesting that people are unwilling to accept that it was just some kind of dream process or just some kind of hallucination. So I think there are still kind of pockets of the inexplicable that remain even after accounting for all of these aberrant and disorganized and all that neurological processes.
Yeah, I just want to come back. So, sorry for you were going to speak, Daniel. I actually wanted to compliment what you said, Andrew, with the fact that actually it's quite interesting, because if you look at the models supported by the evidence around psychedelic action, and we see that with DMT as well, it seems that there is a part that has to do with a deconstruction of all these crystallized models of the world that we have constructed throughout our adulthood. And I actually think that there is room to put forward the hypothesis that there is some form of fundamental state of being that is somehow activated in these experiences, very intense psychedelic experiences, and certainly DMT experiences. And my kind of like initial guess around why it feels so real is because it feels authentic. The experience has a form of elementary feeling to it that is also guised up many times in deceiving ways. So that would be my kind of like mixed also approach to that answer, I guess.
Daniel, did you want to chime in?
Maybe just add a few more pieces. I've thought about this a lot, and I think the brain is trying to perceive something more than four-dimensional, and it can get a little unruly, but I believe it's pointing to this awareness of perception of more than four dimensions. And I think by definition, that makes it feel more real than real, because what we experience as real is, four-dimensional space. And so I think like the brain is trying to wrap its head around something that it's hard for us to comprehend in a normal state. The other thing, what Chris was pointing to, is like it feels familiar. Like there's something about it that it's more of a remembering than it is like uncovering something new sometimes for a lot of people. And so it's like returning to a place that you were before, or where you're going to go when you die, or where we were before we were born. I'm not quite sure what that is, but it feels familiar, and it's more of a remembering. And I think that's what makes it feel more real. And then, the other thing, that a caution of the more real than real doesn't mean it's true. And I think, Chris is pointing to that too, in that, like, there are people who are psychotic that truly believe their worldview is very real, but it doesn't connect with consensus reality or other people's ability to understand it. And Rick Strassman talked to me about this, like when you experience a DMT state and you might be narcissistic and you believe you're the peak of the world and the best of all things, that there's a lot of damage that can be done of somebody who really believes in their delusion, so it's I think it's really important to work with healthy people, and also to check them when they come back, and like do the reality testing, and push their edges a little bit with what Andrew was saying about, like, they really believe it happened, and I think that's, we don't want to discount that, but we want to check it, as much as we can. So those are my thoughts on that one, for sure.
Thanks so much. All great answers. This next one is a pretty quick one. Are there any plans to contact high-level Buddhist meditation masters that can be injected with DMT? In other words, enrolling meditation masters in DMTx?
I can speak to that briefly, but we do want to work with not just Buddhist practitioners, but other religious practitioners as well, and that'll be something that we'll step into as we get further along into the program. But Naropa University is here, and there's a lot of Buddhist practitioners in this area, but that would be the idea, is multicultural spiritual practitioners. So people who have like contemplative practices from multiple traditions would be what I would like to do with it.
Yeah, on our end, we're also working in a similar sort of direction, precisely because, again, very experienced meditators have the capacity to talk about their experience at length, and have a capacity to maintain a form of awareness in these extreme states. They have a training of sorts, which I guess you could argue that psychonauts many times may have. The only difference is that we know we don't have schools of practices of thousands of years of psychonauts. So I think it's very interesting to go to very experienced Buddhist practitioners. And I am particularly interested not just in DMT for that, but also 5-methoxy DMT for that purpose, because of the similarities between these non-dual states and these experiences of unity and nothingness that 5-MeO induces.
Great. We'll now take a couple of questions from the audience. Unless, Andrew, did you want to chime in on that last question, or no? Okay. So if you have a question from the in-person audience, could you just please come up to the laptop so that everybody online can hear your question? So Chris, if you want to just pick a couple people raising their hands over there.
Sure, I also have to leave, but
okay. we'll just do one question then. One question.
Oh, okay.
No, you guys should keep don't mind me. There you go.
Sorry. So you mentioned 5-methoxy, and I was just really curious because obviously it's something that you can help. Is that something, so kind of like how Andrew mentioned, where you could maybe like infuse it for a longer period of time? Is that any research that you've seen anyone do, maybe at the like Imperial, maybe?
A 5-MeO-X?
Yeah.
No, we're not. I think it's too early to
Oh, really?
to think of something like that. I mean, I don't know. It could be done. It's just, I think the safety profile of 5-MeO DMT is still not as well researched as the one from DMT.
What do you think would happen? Because obviously the effects are different. Do you think if you had to predict what would happen if someone is in a prolonged fight?
Well, it depends on the dose. That depends on the level of that extreme, but I would be kind of afraid to extend it too much. But I think we do have, methods of administration that could mimic to a certain extent a prolongation, which is intranasal administration, for example, or intramuscular administration.
Oh, I see.
And in controlled contexts, it appears to be fairly safe, although there is some data suggesting that, these 5-MeO experiences, when they're strong, they can be they can be challenging. So I think maybe, but further along the line.
That's very cool. Thank you.
I think they might came unplugged at some point.
So what?
I think they might came unplugged.
Oh.
So hopefully they heard that.
Oh.
Yes, yeah, no, that all came through loud and clear online. So I know Chris has got to go, and I'm sure Andrew's itching to get some sleep. So I think we'll end the event here, even though I have probably 10 hours worth of questions that I could ask the three of you. So thank you so much again for joining us for this event. I'd love to do another edition where we can dive deeper into coming up with these maps. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. It was great.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.